So let's talk about the text. Before we get into the Old Testament context, which is what I want to spend a few minutes talking about, in fact, probably a few minutes spread over 2 or 3 videos, I want to read the text. So Luke chapter 1, verses 46 to 55, the well-known text where Mary worships the Lord because of what has just been happening. And starting in verse 46, "And Mary said, My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever." Now, this passage, for someone who is familiar with the language of the Hebrew Bible, is just packed with reminiscences, with allusions, and in some cases downright quotes of language from the Hebrew Bible. And so I think it's important that we kind of think about that a little bit, because context is everything when we're trying to interpret the Bible. So one of the first texts I think about is 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. In that passage, Hannah, who is married to a man named Elkanah, Hannah and Elkanah, yes, you heard that correctly. Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 2 actually expresses similar kinds of ideas when she rejoices both at their child Samuel's birth and at his what's the right word, attachment, I think, to the tabernacle under the high priest Eli. So it is after Hannah, who the Old Testament tells us is barren. That is, she cannot have children, and she's not the first one in this context, or with this motif. That's probably a better word, this motif in the Hebrew Bible. But she ends up being healed, if you will. That's kind of how the text portrays it. She's praying. There's interchange with Eli the high priest, and then he tells her, look, the Lord's heard your cry. And not too long after that, if you're reading in 1 Samuel 1, Hannah gets pregnant. They have the child Samuel, and then Hannah and Elkanah take Samuel to the tabernacle and dedicate him to the Lord's service there and leave him under the care of Eli. It was after that, not just when she's pregnant, but it was after the leaving or the attaching of Samuel to the tabernacle. And there's a difference between tabernacle and temple in the Old Testament. It was then that Hannah just exclaims to the Lord this song of praise. If you read side by side 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, and Luke chapter 1, verses 46 to 55, you will definitely see some similarities. One of the things that strikes me when I look at the text before Hannah's exclamation in 1 Samuel 2 is that it's said that the Lord remembers her. Well, when you come over here to the Luke 1 passage, the Lord remembers Israel. And this idea of remembering is kind of a big thing in the Old Testament. You see it all the time. God remembers his servant. He remembers Israel. He remembers his covenant. He remembers, and the context kind of drives the idea that when he remembers, he acts. So when you look at these two passages, you find a lot of similarities, some of which I've already named, but here's some more. There are similar speakers. Both of the speakers are women. There are similar ideas in terms. Here's one. like God raises up the lowly and puts down the rich or the mighty. There are similar announcements. Husbands, both in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and in Luke chapter 1, the husbands are in the background. There is a connectivity between the tabernacle / temple in both 1 Samuel chapter 2 and Luke chapter 1. In 1 Samuel 2, you have this high priest Eli, and in Luke chapter 1, you have the priest Zechariah, who is married to Elizabeth, who is Mary's cousin. And both Elizabeth and Mary are pregnant. They have overlapping time periods in which they were pregnant, and Elizabeth gives birth to the son that we end up knowing as John the Baptist, and obviously Mary gives birth to Jesus. But there are some dissimilarities as well when I look at this text. When Hannah rejoices, Samuel's already born, but Mary rejoices before Jesus is born. And by the way, when I say these are dissimilarities, it's not that it's necessarily consequential, but it may be. They're just things when we're looking at the text we investigate, we think about, we chew on, much as you would think about, diagnostics with a patient, or to figure out what disease is, or to figure if the treatment plan is working. We're looking at data, right? So Mary is a virgin, where obviously Hannah is not. And of course, depending on your view of the Bible, some question the validity, the historical veracity of the virgin birth. That is not my intent here. The text will tell us that she'd not yet been with a man sexually. Mary is in a different political climate than Hannah is. At this time, when Hannah has this experience, Israel is kind of quasi self-ruling. There's a lot that we could do to unpack that, but we'll just call it they're kind of in a self-ruling modality. Whereas when Mary comes to be pregnant with the child Jesus, Rome is the dominant power of the day and is in fact exerting rulership, or we might use the word hegemony, over the area of Judea, Galilee, and Samaria, that area of Palestine that we tend to think of as like the Holy Land. So 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 to 10, Luke chapter 1, verses 46 to 55. If you do no other comparison, please read these two texts side by side and let that kind of ruminate in you. We're going to come back in the next video and talk about Genesis 12, 1 through 3, a little bit in Isaiah, a little bit in Amos, and go from there. Thanks.